It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha, it's Feedback Friday. We made it. We made it to Friday. We made it to. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I mean, Leanna Care sessions this week. Everyone's just getting through the week. I'm just getting through the week. God, I'll spare you the gory details of health stuff this week. It's very funny, but it's kind of gross. So I will spare you. Let me do the help support this channel and I mean, yeah, let's do it. I'm really tired, so forgive me. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for those who can use but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K, or the GoFundMe, the men's group. Thanks everybody who kicked in to the men's group and coffee this week. I haven't checked the Patreon yet. I sent in the Patreon right now. I'm getting really great feedback on stuff related to the men's group. This week was about how to shape the Discord server attached to it. I talk a lot about how I'm very, very wary of Discord, and you know, the trust you guys put in me in all of these initiatives is not lost on me, and that's me pivoting to the feedback for the week, because I didn't know, this is gonna sound really weird, I didn't know how to handle the amount of positives this week, and it was a week I really needed it because it was rough in other ways. But you know, the pressurized masculinity as you know, over pressurized masculinity is alternative to the idea of fragile masculinity. You know, people like that. The Two Women Talking song was all through the comments on Two Women Talking, but I'll just and again, you know, if you want to sponsor a Two Women Talking, let me know. I really should set up an email just for that. I'm thinking out loud. I will get on that. I've got so many little tasks to do, and you know, I've been doing 12-hour days. So by the time I get to the end of the day, I'm so fried, and I forget to. So if I have dropped the ball on something this week, just please remind me. But I mean, it's been a tumultuous week in a lot of ways. And turns out Tears of the Kingdom is much longer than I expected. I thought we were going towards the end game, and like, no, there's more. Is this Final Fantasy? I'm confused. And somebody sold me on Final Fantasy 16 this week. It sounds really cool. They were telling me the combat is very, very different and designed by a former Devil May Cry guy. So I'm like, all right, I'm intrigued. You're speaking my language. And apparently I taught multiple people what badonk is, as in badonkadonk, as in the Missy Elliott lyric, keep your eyes on my badonkadonk donk. Like, I thought most people knew it meant but yeah. I want to read one comment from the find the right file. One person said about the masculinity discussion. The topic about shrinking acceptable masculinity got me thinking. I agree that it seems like an acceptable man has gotten shrunk in much the same way an acceptable woman is. This leads me to wonder if there's a correlation between this and the atomization of gender. I found that term very interesting. That is trans, non-binary, agender, gender creative, etc. I'm not saying one begets the other, but it does seem linked somehow that if I'm a man and no one thinks that I'm acceptably male, that I may then say, okay, I'm not male, I'm insert choice here. Realistically, both categorization methods, more gender versus broader genders, seem to be trying to come to grips with the same thing, that is gender being a spectrum. It just makes me think a bit. It also seems to me that it sucks since a person in general will likely get some form of pressure or erasure based on their gender either way. And I thought that was a At first I was like, uh-oh. And then I thought that was actually a thoughtful way of discussing it. And I do think that there is a Venn diagram in what those two things are trying to solve for. The one thing to keep in mind is that there's innate gender identity, and then there's the gender categories that society accommodates for. And they're not the same thing. What do I mean by that? I mean, for instance, someone's gender identity as male or someone's gender identity as female or someone's gender identity is neither or both is not the same as what society does with that, right? So the social construct element of only men can own property or only men can vote or only women can be in certain spaces, gender segregated public washrooms. None of that stuff is inherently linked to one's gender identity. So there's the reality of gender identity and the reality that some people just do not match the gender, the anatomy they had at birth. And you even got to be careful with that. Like, okay, some people had an anatomy that doesn't match their brain gender identity at birth. Other people actually were born intersex and had corrective surgery as an infant and the doctor picked wrong. That's a whole other category of people, but then you got the people who are rebelling against what gender means. And that's when we get into some of these categories. And personally, I separate the legal access issues, right? People who have to change government documents, people who need the equivalent of a gender recognition certificate to live their life in a way that doesn't feel like they're an interloper in the spaces they're forced to use. That is a very different issue than all this philosophical stuff. If you need to change your government documents, that's one bucket of stuff. And then there's this other bucket of stuff. And the other stuff is important, but the denial of rights that are going, and then of course, access to gender affirming care is part of that services thing. And I think we got to be laser focused on the denial of rights issue that's going on with transgender and non-binary people. And then the other stuff is interesting to me. Obviously, I'm affected by them, and I've talked before about waffling back and forth about whether I'm not a girl or I'm just really bad at being a girl, and then I decided I don't care. And I'm actually beyond I don't care to the point that I think it's funny. Because I do bounce around and I realize it is confusing for people. And it, I've become so much more to think about my own path of being so angry and so rejecting of anything girly as a kid, and then defending it vociferously as an adult simply because I am not that. And knowing what it's like to be the less desired category as a kid, I do not like this idea that girly girls are less strong or valid is the better term. They're less kenuff than the chick with the sword or the warrior woman. Because no matter what hierarchy is there, someone loses. And this idea that only one thing can be okay at a time is not okay by me as someone who suffered through the shit end of that as a kid. I don't want that to happen to other people just because, I'm not, or I benefit in this particular paradigm. I don't like that. I don't want to benefit. I want equality. I don't just want to flip the hierarchy. I want to it, right? And this is where we get into the Japanese media analysis. And for some people who don't know, I have an anthropology background. I took anthropology in university, and it was game changing. Taking anthropology at the same time as I was taking women's studies, and seeing how things were treated very differently in anthropology than they were in the interdisciplinary approach that was gender studies began my dislike of interdisciplinary approaches. I think there's nothing wrong with examining a subject from multiple angles. But the problem with using an interdisciplinary approach to something like a Japanese video game is that if you're not careful, you can be colonial in your attitude. It's not even because, I guess if you consider the post-war reaction, Japan's interesting because they sort of invited other cultures in, and yet they are as influence, and they're happy to borrow from other cultures, but like it's still a very homogenous culture, and the whole gaijin thing is real. So you really can't judge Japanese stuff by any other metric. And with gender, there are gender categories in Japanese media that don't exist in Western media. And they're not the same punch as the idea of masculine and feminine, because again, identity is contextual in Japanese culture. Not universally, because there's a Western influence, but the idea of, there's you, but then there's you, it's like a Venn diagram. Identity was what intersectionalism is supposed to be, but that's gone out the window. But like you as a part of your family, you as a part of your company, you as a part of your city, prefecture, country, so on and so forth. It's different. And so when you get very subversive gender tropes, because, gender roles in Japan are intense in the real world. And anime is a displacement of that. And so you get the, tsunderes and bishonen and things like that. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But those are incredibly subversive. Now, they've become commonplace in media, and the Japanese don't freak out about it the same way because it's not intended to reflect reality. It's displacing reality. And that matters. Because to take a Western idea that these characters are saying anything about the real world and are therefore against women or against men is just, like that. No, you're only hurt by it if you internalize it. And the reason I'm going game by game in the Zelda series is Zelda takes on a bunch of different archetypes. I mean, the next video, once we hit, Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, that's when a lot of I wanted to start with the first two games to show just how simple and humble the original concepts were. And then you get a lot of the extra stuff that is now established Zelda canon starts showing up in Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is going to be its own video because, oh my god, there's so much there. Because of course that's where you get a timeline split. And I mean, Zelda lore is dense, and we'll see how far we can get with this. And my goal, just so everyone is clear, and for the record, people asked, and I should say this, I mentioned to people there is contemporaneous evidence that I was planning this series before Feminist Frequency folded. This was just, I admit, lucky for me, because I expected more pushback than I got. And the pushback I got, it was interesting because it was one of those things of, they start off by saying they agree with me, and then there's a but. And I'm, Ned Stark's school of everything before a but is bullshit. But I think they were just excited and trying to make conversation, and I'm taking it as that, even though I did point out some errors in their reasoning, because I try to be nice, but I can't, because I think certain, logical fallacies and people have been taught to think that way. People have been taught to remove and add information that doesn't actually exist so that they don't have to change their mind, instead of being very open to changing their mind based on the facts. And that's taught. And I that's taught by university in a lot of cases, because for whatever, the whole liberal arts thesis, argue your thesis, pound it in. Academic writing is ironically so toxically masculine, in that, it really has such a condescending tone and encourages lashing out at sources and kind of being theatrical in the presentation, instead of going, let's examine this. And I still love the 5-paragraph essay format. And I use that in a lot of my video game analysis. And somebody checked me, and I think I can clarify this, so this one's all right, about using TV tropes as a source for tropes, because it's a wiki and it's collaborative, right? And the reason I used, and fair, it is evolving, but I think that the thing about TV tropes that's interesting is it's because it's what's agreed on, and I do think that the danger to put the cast in motion is important, because the problem with the very broad application, the you must avoid any peril happening to a female character that she cannot save herself from, that she requires rescue from, you end up pushing characters into Mary Sue territory, even though that's not the intention. Because if you have to have a female character save herself every single fucking time, or she's a damsel in distress and therefore bad, it's hamstringing storytelling, because that's why I brought up the badass in distress, the fact that it's treated as a very different thing. It's designed to make male characters more interesting and relatable, because they can't solve every problem on their own. You know how I feel about double standards that way. They point to persistent inequality. My definition of sexism is any any paradigms or behaviors that elevate one gender over other genders. And if men are not expected to save themselves every damn time, and women are, well, that's putting one gender over others. It's perpetuating this either ideas that men are supposed to be inherently independent and women aren't, and so we must fight against that, or the idea that men are allowed to need help and women aren't. Like, it's fucked up no matter the way you look at it. And that's why I think it's very important. And because the video game industry took tropes versus women and just unquestioningly went, yes, Zelda bad, Peach bad, damsel in distress bad. And whether the damsel in distress is actually bad instead of just overused is a different discussion. The thing that I think shamed a lot of developers is, yes, it was very overused. As one commenter said, that at the time Zelda came out, go rescue the girlfriend was a huge trope in games because of Mario, right? It was a story you could tell with very few words. And the significance of stories you could tell in very few words matters. Because, I mean, when you think about the entirety of The Legend of Zelda, there are very few words in that game. Far more than Mario. But there are very few words in that game. And so the way people discounted things, oh, well, that was in the game manual. Oh, well, if you eliminate these things, then she's a classic damsel in distress. Yes, but the whole point is you have to ignore information to say Zelda's a classic damsel in distress. And that's the whole thing. People are. Why are they so invested in her being this? Because they think there's a moral charge to it, and there just isn't. You know? The reason I say the damsel in distress is a definition of exclusion is because of damsel in distress and nothing else. Because if we must disprove damsel in distress, aka negative trope against women that is a negative depiction of women and holds women back, and shame on you for ever using it, even to invert it, and then we complain about men having issues asking for help, and that's toxic masculinity. Like, there's a logic fault there. Women must save themselves and be independent and never get help, because otherwise you're a traitor to your gender. But if men feel similar pressure to never ask for help, well, they're toxic masculinity. And yes, this has been the messaging for the last 10 fucking years. And the surprising thing to me was not that nobody said it. Not that some people agreed with it. Some people agree that, yes, of course, people are wrong. But what got me was the almost universal enforcement of this unproven idea. There's no, everybody focused on the Princess Peach analysis because it just chucked out Mario Kart, Super Princess Peach, Mario Party. I don't remember Mario Party was out that, but I just remember dismissed Super Princess Peach because it was a DS game. Dismissed Mario 2 because it wasn't Mario 2 in Japan. It was a Doki Doki Panic reskin. It's still there. And, then all the Mario Kart things. She's dirty fighter with a blue shell. Smash Brothers. Like, Princess Peach is not depicted across the board as a damsel in distress. The first game, sure. But she's branched out. But to then... And we can have a discussion about character arcs And again, all these people with liberal arts degrees or interdisciplinary studies degrees that say the character has no arc when it suits them, and then refusing to let a character evolve from its origin because I don't know. I don't know the emotional reasons, because they feel threatened by girly princess in pink dress. I felt threatened by girly princess in pink dress because I cannot be girly princess in pink dress. And let me tell you, the problem with this is that we have to validate girly princess in pink dress because if you live long enough, you can't be that anymore. And if you are constantly at war with that ideal, you're going to feel like shit. And there's been a lot of talk about where a woman's worth is and how much it ties to reproduction. But if we keep being afraid of these tropes, we are giving them power. Because if we make, kawaii femininity into a dangerous, evil thing, well, we're elevating it the same way rock music got elevated, video games got elevated, hip hop got elevated. Oh, it's the thing, the squares. It's the thing the not cool people don't want you to access. What is this thing? Let me check it out. Right? The whole devil music, devil's game. If that's the devil trope for women, then there's going to be an appeal. And I really think that's why the Barbie movie so caught fire. And the weird thing is that the whole Handmaid's Tale phenomenon, I mean, the only thing that separates Offred from a damsel in distress through most of the book, not the show extrapolated, but through most of the book is we know what she thinks about her predicament, but she can't save her fucking self. That's a society-wide thing. Should we make movies about slavery where the slaves are expected to save themselves? Should we make movies about human trafficking where the traffic victims are supposed to save themselves? No, this is absurd. This sounds stupid, right? Like, no, that's not understanding systems of oppression. And yet, damsel in distress bad. This is why I want to bury this dead with Zelda. And this is why I'm going to do like 2 or 3 games at a time, possibly Ocarina as a standalone. After, game, jump back, retcon meaning of other games, jump back, like Zelda continuity is this whole game of leapfrog, which is fun and funny and interesting, but really doesn't impact the close read of Zelda's character. And I'm looking forward to doing Link to the Past next, just because, oh my god, is that plot convoluted. I was refreshing my memory on it and dying of laughter because it's so... We're going to do it again and subvert it, and do it again and subvert it, and do it again and subvert it, and it's just... It was beat the dead horse punchline almost in that game. And it's almost like the Japanese making fun of Western storytelling, but I will save that for next Wednesday's video. If you are still looking for mental health content, It's Not Therapy podcast. The link is in the description box of every single video. You can check that out. You can listen to your mental health content there. There is a separate YouTube channel for it, but I don't know where it is at the moment. If you go to Podbean, there's a link. But yeah, it was cool that people were agreeing and adding. One person brought up the Tomoe legend in Japan and how that's informed a trope in Japanese storytelling. And I think at the end of the day, the damsel in distress thing is interesting, but I'm using it as sort of a example of how messed up it is that Western critics of video games insist that Japanese storytelling conform to their semiotics, their heuristics, what symbols mean to them, instead of understanding it based on what Japanese media means to the Japanese. I just don't see how that's not a racist colonial mindset. Because in Japan, unless there's a prominent woman in a movie, it's less likely to do well. It's very different from Western cinema that has been so male focused because of the new Hollywood cinema movement of the 1960s. But I'll leave it for now because we're at the half-hour mark. I really needed the boost this week. So thank you, everybody. Not that you did it to kiss my ass. That's what makes it well-timed. I appreciate your authentic, earnest support. And it was nice to see people excited that game analysis was back, because I love games and I love talking about games, and it just wears me out when I want to talk on a deep level about something and people keep wanting to force it into the derivative shit that the discourse is. I hate it when people take what I say and try to shoehorn it into a pre-existing opinion, because I don't do that. So it's very rewarding that you guys got it. And I hope you'll continue. And some people have offered to help, which is really nice, because, yeah, I can't replay every single game, so collective memory is nice. But yeah, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Kick me some Patreon bucks if you like the Zelda video, or buy one time Leanna Care session for someone who use it can't afford it. Coffee.com/AnnaK, or the men's group GoFundMe, so we can have conversations about media like this that won't get screeched at because it's in public. Thanks for watching, and I don't have everybody. Oh my god, I'm so tired. I'm done for the week. Have a great weekend.